Good morning. Topic for today's seminar is hypertensive emergencies. I'm Dr. Vishwas and my moderator for this seminar is Dr. Holla. Basic terminology. Hypertension, as we all know, this is given by American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association. The normal blood pressure is systolic less than 120 and diastolic less than 80 millimeter of mercury. If the systolic blood pressure is between 120 to 129, with the diastolic pressure being normal, it is called as elevated blood pressure. Stage 1 hypertension is systolic between 130 to 139 or diastolic between 80 to 89 millimeter of mercury. Stage 2 hypertension is if the systolic blood pressure is 140 or diastolic blood pressure is at least 90 millimeter of mercury and above. Another terminology which we use is hypertensive crisis, which is described as systolic blood pressure over 180 millimeter of mercury and or diastolic over 120 millimeter of mercury, with patients needing prompt changes in medication if there are no other indications or problems, or immediate hospitalization if there are signs of organ damage. So this shows the comparison between the definitions given by JNC 7 and American College of Cardiology definitions for hypertension. The definition for normal blood pressure remains the same in both the classifications. If the diastolic blood pressure is normal and the systolic blood pressure between 120 to 129, it is termed as elevated BP as given by American College of Cardiology. However, the JNC uses a different terminology known as pre-hypertension, in which the systolic blood pressure between 120 to 139 and diastolic between 80 to 89 has been termed as pre-hypertension. However, if the BP is between 130, systolic BP is between 130 to 139 and diastolic between 80 to 89, it becomes stage 1 hypertension according to American College of Cardiology. BP between 140, systolic BP between 140 to 159 or diastolic BP between 90 to 99 becomes stage 1 hypertension according to JNC 7, and it is stage 2 hypertension in American College of Cardiology. In American College of Cardiology, anything more than 140 systolic or more than 90 diastolic is stage 2 hypertension. However, in JNC 7, stage 2 hypertension is systolic more than 160 and diastolic more than 100 millimeter of mercury. Also, in the latest JNC 8 classification, there was no new categories given for the definition of hypertension. So it's the same which is being used. Coming to the terminology which we often use and sometimes get confused also, which is hypertensive urgency versus hypertensive emergency. Hypertensive urgency is defined as severe hypertension, which is usually a diastolic blood pressure of more than 120 millimeter of mercury in asymptomatic patients with no acute end organ damage. It is sometimes also called uncontrolled severe hypertension. Whereas hypertensive emergency is severe hypertension, which is also usually diastolic blood pressure of more than 120 millimeter of mercury with evidence of acute end organ damage. Also to be noted is that there is no specific threshold, since individuals who develop an acute rise in blood pressure can also develop symptoms if the previous blood pressure was normal. Another terminology which is previously used, which is malignant hypertension. It entered the medical vocabulary in 1928 because at that time the prognosis of such conditions like severely increased blood pressure, the prognosis was compared to that of many cancer patients. So now this terminology has become obsolete. Hence, it should not be used. Coming to the types of hypertensive emergencies according to the end organ damage associated. First is grade 3 to 4 hypertensive retinopathy with severely elevated blood pressure. Hypertensive emergencies include hypertensive encephalopathy, ischemic stroke, intracerebral hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and even head trauma. Cardiac emergencies include acute aortic dissection, acute LV failure, acute or impending MI, or any acute coronary syndrome, and post-surgery, post-CABG patients having severely elevated blood pressure. Then renal emergencies. These include acute glomerulonephritis, renal crisis from collagen vascular diseases, severe hypertension after kidney transplantation, and also MAHA. Then we can have hypertensive emergencies associated with excessive circulating catecholamines. This can happen in pheochromocytoma crisis. Also, food and drug interactions with MAO inhibitors use and sympathomimetic drug use such as cocaine. Also, there is rebound hypertension after sudden cessation of antihypertensive drugs such as clonidine. Then even obstetric conditions such as eclampsia, preeclampsia can be included under this. Also, surgical emergencies are there, such as severe hypertension in patients requiring immediate surgery, then post-operative hypertension, post-operative bleeding from vascular suture lines. Severe hypertension associated with severe body burns is also included in this, and severe epistaxis is also included. Coming to the evaluation of a patient presenting to us with a hypertensive emergency, evaluation should include a thorough history and physical examination and also investigation. So a patient presenting with a severely elevated blood pressure or an acute rise in blood pressure over a normal baseline, we should determine whether any of the following things are present or not. We should rule out head trauma. We should also look for generalized neurological symptoms such as agitation, delirium, stupor, seizures, or visual disturbances. We should also look for focal neurological symptoms, which could be due to an ischemic or a hemorrhagic stroke. Also, fundus examination should be done, and we should look for fresh flame hemorrhages, exudates, or cotton wool spots, or papilledema when we are doing the fundoscopy, and so that to rule out changes which are consistent with grade 3 or 4 hypertensive retinopathy. Symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, headache may be suggestive of increased intracranial pressure. Chest discomfort or pain may be due to an MI or aortic dissection. Also, acute severe back pain. This is one of the things which we might miss out. It could be due to an aortic dissection. Dyspnea, which could be due to pulmonary edema. Also, we should look for pregnancy in patients who are of reproductive age group, so that to rule out preeclampsia or eclampsia. Drug use history should also be found out if the patient has been using any cocaine, amphetamines, PCP. Also, if patient is on MAO inhibitors, or whether the patient has discontinued recently any antihypertensives has been discontinued by the patient abruptly. Investigations include ECG to look for ischemic changes, chest X-ray to look for changes suggestive of pulmonary edema, urine analysis to look for hematuria, electrolytes and serum creatinine to look for renal dysfunction, cardiac biomarkers when there is a cardiac pathology or an MI suspected, CT or MRI of the brain when there are neurological symptoms or when a stroke is suspected. Also, contrast enhanced CT of the chest or a transesophageal echocardiography can be done when an aortic dissection is suspected. Coming to the treatment, optimal therapy, including the choice of agent and the blood pressure goal, varies according to the specific hypertensive emergency. It is generally unwise to lower the blood pressure too quickly or too much, as ischemic damage can occur in the vascular beds that have become habituated with the higher level of blood pressure. That is also called autoregulation. For most hypertensive emergencies, the mean arterial pressure should be reduced gradually, approximately by 10 to 20% in the first hour, and also by further 5 to 15% over the next 23 hours. This often results in a target blood pressure of less than 120 by less than 180 systolic by less than 120 diastolic for the first hour, and less than 160 by 110 for the next 23 hours. Firstly, acute phase of an ischemic stroke. The BP is not lowered unless it is more than 185 by 110 millimeter of mercury in patients who are candidates for thrombolysis, or if the BP is more than 220 by 120 in patients who are not the candidates for thrombolysis. However, if a patient has an acute aortic dissection, the systolic blood pressure should be rapidly lowered to a target of 100 to 120 millimeter of mercury, which has to be attained within the first 20 minutes of diagnosis of this condition. And this is required to reduce the aortic shearing forces. It can be life-saving for the patient. Also, in intracerebral hemorrhage, the goals of antihypertensive therapy are variable. We have to assess the risk versus the benefit. This has been discussed again later. After a suitable period, often 8 to 24 hours of blood pressure control at target in the ICU, oral medications are usually given and the initial IV therapy is tapered and discontinued. Coming to the neurological emergencies. Firstly, ischemic stroke. In ischemic stroke, the perfusion pressure, which is distal to the obstructed vessel, is low and the distal vessels are dilated. Because of impaired cerebral autoregulation, the blood flow in these dilated vessels is thought to be dependent upon the systemic blood pressure. Arterial blood pressure is usually elevated in patients who are having an acute stroke. It can be due to the chronic hypertension or acute sympathetic response to the stroke. Acutely elevated blood pressure is necessary to maintain brain perfusion in borderline ischemic areas. Also, BP frequently rises spontaneously following cerebral ischemia, inconsistent with a hypothesis which is known as protective hypothesis, and hence sometimes this blood hypertensive effect, which is transient, comes down by as much as 20 by 10 millimeter of mercury within 10 days of the stroke. Hence, we should not be very aggressive in controlling the BP for such patients. Patients with acute ischemic stroke who are eligible for IV thrombolytic therapy. In such patients, BP reduction should be done if the BP is more than 185 systolic or more than 110 diastolic, as such target BP less than this is required to be for the thrombolysis to be done successfully. Otherwise, thrombolysis cannot be started. The blood pressure should be stabilized and maintained at or below 180 by 105 millimeter of mercury for at least 24 hours after thrombolytic treatment. Patients with ischemic stroke who are not treated with thrombolytic therapy, the blood pressure should not be treated acutely unless the hypertension is extreme, which is systolic blood pressure of more than 220 or diastolic more than 120, or if the patient has active ischemic coronary disease, heart failure, aortic dissection, hypertensive encephalopathy, or preeclampsia, eclampsia. Coming to hemorrhagic stroke, management of BP in patients with spontaneous intracerebral hemorrhage and subarachnoid hemorrhage is complicated by risk versus the benefits. The risks being reduction of cerebral perfusion and benefit being reducing further bleeding. Intravenous labetalol and nicardipine are most often used as first-line agents. In patients having head trauma with increased intracranial pressure, severe elevations in blood pressure can be produced. Hypertension in such patients is usually treated only if the cerebral perfusion pressure, which is mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure, is more than 120 millimeter of mercury and the intracranial pressure is more than 20 millimeter of mercury. Coming to hypertensive encephalopathy. The signs and symptoms of hypertensive encephalopathy, such as headache, confusion, nausea, vomiting, usually abate after the blood pressure is lowered. Hence, it becomes a diagnosis of exclusion, which is confirmed retrospectively when the mental status of the patient improves after the lowering of blood pressure. Suspected patients' BP should be lowered by 10 to 20% during the first hour of treatment. Additional lowering should be gradual such that the BP is reduced by no more than 25% at the end of the first day of treatment. Commonly used medications include clevidipine, nicardipine, phenolopam, and nitroprusside. Coming to cardiac emergencies, first one being acute heart failure. Patients who are having acute LV dysfunction and pulmonary edema should usually receive loop diuretics, such as furosemide. A vasodilator that is easy to titrate, such as sodium nitroprusside or nitroglycerin, is often added to reduce the afterload. Drugs that increase the cardiac work, such as hydralazine, or acutely decrease cardiac contractility, such as beta blocker or labetalol, should be avoided in such cases. The goal of these therapies is amelioration of volume excess and heart failure and improvement in pulmonary edema, which can often be achieved with a 10 to 15% reduction in the blood pressure. Severe hypertension, which is associated with an acute coronary syndrome, including acute MI, is appropriately treated with IV nitroglycerin, IV clevidipine, nicardipine, or beta blockers such as metoprolol or esmolol. The main goal is to reduce the myocardial oxygen consumption, also to reduce the underlying coronary ischemia, and to improve the prognosis. Coming to vascular emergencies, first one being acute aortic dissection. Patients, as previously discussed, patients who are having acute aortic dissection require a rapid BP correction, and the goal of systolic blood pressure should be 100 to 120 millimeter of mercury within approximately 20 minutes of diagnosis. An IV beta blocker is usually given first, usually esmolol because of its rapid onset of action. However, labetalol, propranolol, and metoprolol can also be used to reduce the heart rate also to below 60 beats per minute and the stress on the aortic wall. In addition, a vasodilator, often an IV nitrate or calcium channel blocker, is typically required to quickly achieve the BP goal. Severe hypertension in patients with recent vascular surgery can threaten the suture lines, and therefore, such patients are often treated with rapidly acting IV antihypertensive agents in an ICU setting. Coming to renal emergencies, severe hypertension may occasionally cause acute injury to the kidneys, which is also sometimes called acute hypertensive nephrosclerosis. This condition is characterized by hematuria, which is usually microscopic, and an elevated serum creatinine level. The renal vascular disease leads to glomerular ischemia and activation of RAS, which possibly exacerbates the hypertension. Antihypertensive therapy often leads to worsening of the kidney function. This decline in the kidney function may be worse in patients with high-grade osteostenosis of one or both of the renal arteries. Although this acute kidney injury sometimes requires dialysis, the reduction in kidney function may be reversed with a long-term blood pressure control. The drug of choice in patients having renal dysfunction with a hypertensive emergency is phenolopam, which is a dopamine 1 agonist. It is also associated with temporary improvement in the kidney function, and therefore it is a useful hypertensive agent in such patients. Coming to sympathetic overactivity resulting in the hypertensive emergencies, most commonly being withdrawal of short-acting antihypertensive agents, especially clonidine. However, propranolol and other beta blockers can also cause this. This is associated with severe hypertension and may mimic the signs and symptoms of a pheochromocytoma. Typically, a reinstitution of the recently discontinued drug will lower the blood pressure. However, if it is due to withdrawal of beta blocker, which have a longer onset of action, there might be some requirement of temporary IV drugs which can be given in the meantime when the BP is controlled with the beta blocker. Next is ingestion of sympathomimetic agents. Example, tyramine containing foods in patients who are taking MAO inhibitors. Also amphetamine-like compounds such as cocaine, PCP. These can precipitate severe hypertension and end organ damage. Such patients should be treated with IV phentolamine, or if phentolamine is unavailable, then sodium nitroprusside. Coming to next, pheochromocytoma, which can also produce severe hypertension and acute end organ damage. Patients having pheochromocytoma should receive adequate alpha-adrenergic blockade with phenoxybenzamine, followed by beta blockade. However, if any of these patients develops a hypertensive crisis perioperatively, then we should use sodium nitroprusside, nicardipine, or phentolamine. So, severe autonomic dysfunction, such as GB syndrome, can also produce hypertensive emergency. In such patients, we can use phentolamine, nitroprusside, or labetalol. Unless a beta blocker was recently withdrawn, administration of a beta blocker alone is contraindicated in such settings, which are due to adrenergic overdrive, since inhibition of beta receptor induced vasodilation can result in unopposed alpha adrenergic vasoconstriction and a further rise in blood pressure. In hypertensive emergencies during pregnancy, most commonly used drugs are methyl-dopa, hydralazine, and labetalol. Sometimes phenoldopam and nicardipine can also be used. However, sodium nitroprusside is contraindicated because of its toxic effects. Coming to the pharmacotherapy, a variety of parenteral and oral drugs are available for use. The choice of drug is often dictated by the type of hypertensive emergency and also the local availability of the drugs. Coming to the parenteral drugs, first being nitrates. Nitro-vasodilators such as sodium nitroprusside and nitroglycerin provide nitric oxide that induces vasodilatation of both arterioles and veins via generation of cyclic GMP, which activates calcium-sensitive potassium channels in the cell membrane. Sodium nitroprusside. It has a rapid onset of action within less than a minute, and its effects disappear within 10 minutes or less of cessation of the drug. Frequent monitoring is required to avoid sudden and drastic drop in blood pressure. The recommended starting dose of nitroprusside is 0.25 to zero point 0.5 microgram per kg per minute, and maximum dose is 8 to 10 microgram per kg per minute. Limitations of sodium nitroprusside: metabolized to cyanide, possibly leading to development of cyanide toxicity that may be fatal. It can also result in dose-related declines in coronary, renal, and cerebral perfusion. Also, it cannot be given to pregnant women and in patients with impaired renal function. Also, it is a very costly drug. Drug should be used only when other IV hypertensive agents are not available because it has lot of toxic effects. Coming to nitroglycerin, the onset of action is 2 to 5 minutes and duration of action is 5 to 10 minutes. It is similar in action and pharmacokinetics as nitroprusside and produces relatively greater venodilatation as compared to arteriolar dilatation. It has a lesser antihypertensive efficacy, and usually prolonged infusions are avoided to prevent tachyphylaxis. Usually infusion is given up to 24 hours. Initial dose is 5 microgram per minute, and we can go up to a maximum dose of 100 microgram per minute. Adverse effects include headache due to direct vasodilatation and tachycardia, which is resulting from reflex sympathetic activation. However, no cyanide accumulation is associated. However, few case reports have been reported about methemoglobinemia in patients in whom infusion was used for more than 24 hours. Coming to the second category of drugs, which is calcium channel blockers. Firstly, clevidipine. It is an ultra-short acting dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker used intravenously to treat severe hypertension. It is hydrolyzed by serum esterases and has a serum elimination half-life of 5 to 15 minutes. It reduces blood pressure without affecting cardiac filling pressures but can cause reflex tachycardia. Initial dose is 1 mg per hour and the maximum dose is 21 mg per hour. It is contraindicated in severe aortic stenosis because it increases the risk of severe hypotension. It is also contraindicated in dyslipidemia because it is administered in a lipid-laden emulsion. And patients who are having allergies to soy or eggs should also not be given this drug because these are used to produce the emulsion. It is also found to be more effective than NTG, nitroprusside, and nicardipine in acutely hypertensive patients who are post-cardiac surgery. However, there is not much data available regarding the benefit of this drug over the other drugs in a hypertensive emergency. Next is nicardipine, which is also a dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker, which can be given as an intravenous infusion. Initial dose is 5 mg per hour and maximum dose is 15 mg per hour. Nicardipine has a better safety profile and a similar antihypertensive effect when compared to nitroprusside. The major limitations are longer onset of action, which makes rapid titration difficult, and a longer serum elimination half-life, which is 3 to 6 hours. Next category of drug is dopamine 1 agonist, which is phenoldopam. It is a peripheral dopamine 1 receptor agonist, which, unlike other parenteral antihypertensive agents, maintains or even increases the renal perfusion while it lowers the blood pressure. It is very beneficial in patients with impaired renal function, and it also improves the GFR, urine output, and sodium excretion. The initial dose is 0.1 microgram per kg per minute and can be titrated at 15 minute intervals to up to a maximum dose of 1.6 microgram per kg per minute, and maximum infusion is up to 48 hours. Phenyldopam should be avoided in patients who are having glaucoma. Coming to next category, adrenergic blocking agents. Starting with labetalol, it is a combined beta and alpha adrenergic blocker with a rapid onset of action within 5 minutes. It is safe in patients with active coronary disease as it does not increase the heart rate. It is given as a series of IV bolus injections. However, it can also be given as a constant dose infusion. The bolus dose is 20 mg initially, followed by 20 to 80 mg every 10 minutes, to a total of up to 300 mg. The infusion rate is 0.5 to 2 mg per minute. Prior alpha blockade should be done in patients with hyperadrenergic states such as pheochromocytoma or cocaine-amphetamine overdose. It is contraindicated in patients having asthma, COPD, heart failure, bradycardia, or heart block greater than first degree. Next drug is phentolamine. It is a non-selective alpha-adrenergic blocker. Use is limited to treatment of severe hypertension due to increased catecholamine activity, in which examples include pheochromocytoma or tyramine ingestion in a patient being treated with a monoamine oxidase or MAO inhibitor. More effective than other alpha-adrenergic blockers. Also, it is given as IV bolus dose of 10 to 15 mg every 5 to 15 minutes. Next drug is esmolol. It is a cardioselective beta blocker which is rapidly metabolized by the blood esterases. The onset of action is immediate and it has a short half-life of around 9 minutes, and also a total duration of action which is quite short, which is 30 minutes. It is found to be useful in aortic dissection and also during anesthesia to prevent post-intubation hemodynamic perturbations. to oral drugs, oral antihypertensive agents usually lower the blood pressure more slowly than parenteral agents. These are primarily used when parenteral agents are not available or when there is a severe hypertension without serious acute end organ damage, which is also called a hypertensive urgency. So, summarizing, hypertensive emergencies are severe hypertension associated with evidence of acute end organ damage. Types of hypertensive emergencies include cerebrovascular, then hypertensive emergencies with retinal findings, cardiac, renal, catecholamine related, pregnancy related, and surgery related. Evaluation includes history, examination, and relevant investigations. Treatment usually involves gradual lowering of BP with a few exceptions. Risk versus benefit assessment in the reducing the blood pressure has to be considered. Treatment and choice of drug varies for different types of end organ involvement. Usually IV drugs are used, which are nitrates, calcium channel blockers, adrenergic blocking agents. Bolus dose or infusions can be given based upon the clinical scenario. These are the references which I have used. Thank you.